All right, today is May 8th, 2023. My name is Dr. Jason Higgins. I am a historian currently at Virginia Tech. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia today, and joining me remotely from his home in Wyncote, Pennsylvania is Ari Sesu Merretazon. Ari, how have you been doing since we
Yes.
last talked?
Hey, man, I've been super fantastic since the last three interviews and looking forward to completing the project and next steps.
Great. Well, today is the fourth interview in a series that's documenting your life. You're a Vietnam veteran, a formerly incarcerated veteran, and an activist for racial justice and reparations. And before we go into the questions I worked on for today's interview, is there anything throughout those first three interviews, now that you've had a chance to reflect on them, that you wanted to talk about? I could just open it up with that.
Um, just the first three. I'm not so sure I have any things on the spirit of the moment to talk about that we went over. I think we did after reviewing some of the videos. It was solid. I'm very impressed with it.
Are there people in your life that you want to acknowledge as influential on you, someone that you wanted to shout out?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna just try and pick out, maybe not by name because like so many, and I would surely miss some. Definitely, I'll blame it on my TBI anyway. But nevertheless, I want to thank all those folks, the administration there at the Lawton Reformatory that was there at the time that I was there. I really appreciate them supporting me and making sure that the veterans were taken care of and had their day in the public domain, even though they are incarcerated. Surely, I want to thank all the brothers who's in the war with me, primarily those in the 25th Infantry Division, Headquarters Recon, Tango Squad. If any of you are still here, as I am, I want to salute you. I hope that I see you sometime soon, or at least talk to you. Um, and I want to thank, of course, those folks here in Philadelphia who support me 100%, and primarily the organization, which is no longer in existence now because of the death of our president, James Abrams, as Point Man Soldier's Heart Ministry. And so that's pretty much where I still am. There's incomplete business there for me as far as I'm concerned. And I want to just thank all those brothers and sisters who supported me and continue to support me, making sure that there is a Veterans Affairs office according to law in the city of Philadelphia.
Great. Well, that's really where I wanted to start off the interview. You sent me a little bit of information about the lawsuit that you have against the city of Philadelphia. They're required by law to have a director of Veterans Affairs. And can you tell me a little bit about your push to get services for veterans in the city of Philadelphia?
Well, it all started when I started looking for my war buddy, Bobby Williams. And at the same time, James Abrams, who was the founder and president of Point Man Soldier Heart Ministry, he was looking for me because he had heard of my work about and through that I've been doing across the country around veterans, particularly incarcerated veterans, as well as veterans outside of prison. And he finally caught up with me one day. We was viewing a Wallace video on about Bloods, and so I just gave in to him. I really was ducking him and dodging him because I didn't want anything more to do with Veterans Affairs. I was burnt out at the time he reached me. But he told me his story. He told me that for 30 years, the VA in Philadelphia told him that he was never in Vietnam. Can you believe that? Never in Vietnam. A combat veteran, a decorated combat veteran, never in Vietnam. They told him for 30 years. And you know me, I told you I have a big heart. When I heard that, I mean, that convinced me I had to give him some help, you know? And so from there, I got involved with the Point Man Soldier Heart Ministry, became his first vice president and the day-to-day person in terms of chief of staff. And then we started engaging the city of Philadelphia. We told them what we found through the research done by Penn State University, that Philadelphia was one of the only county out of 67 that did not have a Veterans Affairs office. Now, of course, I found out about that when I was looking for Bob, but I found out about that, and so we requested a hearing. before the full city council. Because once we found out about that, we continued to do some more research and what have you. So we was ready to make our presentation, how the Veterans Affairs could be improved in Philadelphia. And so we had the hearing. We told them that Philadelphia is the only city without a Veterans Affairs office, and that they hadn't had a Veterans Affairs office in 1939. That's when the law came on the books. Somebody riddled me that. And not only riddle me that, tell me what happened to all the money during that 66 years that's supposed to come into for veterans in the city of Philadelphia, from the federal government to the state, and of course to the city and county. So right now, we sued them, the political judge, throughout our lawsuit without even looking at it really, and so we had to appeal that, and we did. And the only two issues that we had put forth in our original lawsuit was that the law required very specific way that you set up a Veterans Affairs office, one with a director of Veterans Affairs, then all the types of services that you provide. And one key one was the Veterans Grave Registration Record that the city is supposed to have. So veterans can find their dead brothers and who fought in the war with them, and soldiers and friends, and they didn't have one. And so we went on, continued to try to work with them, try to make something happen, and then we finally got tired of it. In our 9th year, we finally sued them. And at that time, the case was called Ari Merretazon and James Abram versus the Philadelphia City Council. And of course, then the political judges threw it out without a hearing, and so we went on to appeals court. Appeals court said the judge was wrong for throwing our case out. And the two issues that they raised were not the issues that we raised. We raised the fact they didn't have a Veterans Affairs office, and didn't have a director of Veterans Affairs, and we didn't have a Veterans Grave Registration Record. What they came back and replied to that was that Ari Merretazon and James Abram do not live in the city of Philadelphia. Therefore, they cannot serve veterans in the city of Philadelphia. It's a state law. Now, how ludicrous could that be? It's absurd. But these are the people that's running the city of Philadelphia. And I'm not going to say these. I'm going to say point on three people. The president of city council, Darrell Clark, David O., who's the only veterans on the council, who just quit fighting for whatever reason, political reasons he chose to do it. I think he's running for mayor, but I can't support that, and he need to call me if you hear me say that. And because he always tried to get us to support him, and we always did that because we thought there was some reciprocity involved with the clear issue, black and white issue that the city of Philadelphia doesn't have a Veterans Affairs office. So he never did that. In fact, he did something that supported the president of city council in his effort to cover everything up. So now the cover up is in full force, and you will only know it until you begin to engage the Office of Veterans Affairs and engage the President of City Council. Of course, they're going to tell you all types of answers, give you all types of answers, but the law, we have the law right here. The law is in black and white. And so right now, I'm looking forward to a major investigation, an independent investigation of the city of Philadelphia in terms of what happened to all the money that's supposed to have come into the city of Philadelphia for Veterans Affairs since, I'm not going to go back to 1939. I'm going to go right back to the 10 years that the president of city council, the current president of city council, Darrell Clark, has been in office. Just tell me what happened to the money, President Clark. That's what you need to tell the veterans and their parents and their families and their children. So there you go. That's the biggest issue right now for me. And that's the biggest issue that still exists in the city of Philadelphia in 2023.
So I did a little bit of Googling before our interview today, and I did notice in 2022 that they were advertising for a position as the Director of Veterans Affairs for Philadelphia. Do you think that is a result of this lawsuit and your efforts to get a new director?
Yeah, but all the efforts they've done around Veterans Affairs in City of Philadelphia has been because of the efforts of Point Man Soldier's Heart Ministry, okay? Because before then, City Council still have and only had at that time a Veterans Advisory Council. the Veterans Advisory Council do not assist veterans. They assist the political figures to making sure they understand all the holidays for veterans, all the types of things they're supposed to be doing. In fact, our organization, an independent, nonprofit, tax-exempt veteran service organization, was the first veterans organization that called for a parade, a veterans parade. I think that happened in 2021, right? We called for it, it got public, and then they finally held that parade. Of course, President of City Council, he jumps in front of the parade, right? You know, that's how you do. That's how you do. And so right now, but the issue's still the same. All that public stuff that he's doing to cover it up, give it a new face. Bottom line, the law remains the same, and the City Council of Philadelphia remained the same, except for whoever dropped off and whoever will be reelected. But the responsibility remained the same. It remains to the responsibility of the City of Philadelphia in terms of its executive branch, not its legislative branch. Can you figure this out? Why would a Veterans Affairs officer be under the supervision of a legislator? You see, who is not a veteran, who really don't know anything about Veterans Affairs. He sent out one of his veterans, not his veterans, but his constituent service workers to get trained in Veterans Affairs in upstate Pennsylvania for a week. So she go up there and get trained for a week, and she come down and profess that she's an expert in Veterans Affairs. She's not a veteran. She's just following, the instructions of her boss. And at any rate, she probably now been the manager because there's been at least 2 or 3 directors of Veterans Affairs that came through and couldn't deal with the president of the city council because, of course, he wanted to keep all the information under his office. And I applied for the position at one time before. I probably was one of the first ones to apply for it. And probably was the best qualified as I looked at all the candidates because we knew each other and all that good stuff. But it's my advocacy and the projection of what I may do if I become the director, that is, operate a quality-based Veterans Service Office in the city of Philadelphia. What's wrong with that? That's supposed to happen. And I was the person with all the deep experience to make that happen. But, of course, my advocacy got in the way, and I withdrew my lawsuit solely to deal with this question that affects every veteran in the state of Pennsylvania who may want to come to Philadelphia and receive service because they're in a county that don't have those type of resources. But President of City Council said that you have to live in the city of Philadelphia in order to serve the veterans in Philadelphia. How ludicrous is that? But we had to fight through all that. Those are types of ludicrous answers, responses they gave to us. And then to say that veterans, the law requires, all right, the law is all about veterans, but they want to also raise the issue that we didn't have any standing to raise the issue, you see, because we didn't have no interest, no interest separate from the public. Well, we are veterans, so therefore we're separate from the public. I mean, see all these ludicrous arguments they're making just to avoid to try and argue or support state reasons why there's no Veterans Affairs Office in the last 10 years. And it goes back to 1939. And so is that those types of things. I live in Montgomery County. Jim Abrams lives in Delaware County. We are both on the edges of Philadelphia. Philadelphia counties are like a donut. He's on the southwestern edge. I'm on the northwestern edge. And we did everything that the city council would want us to do to make this thing happen, and they still gave us the thumbs down, saying that they have a Veterans Advisory Commission and that's all that's needed. Unbelievable.
Well, Ari, I think what you've tried to do is a really valuable thing for veterans and their families. The grave registration, that's a very profound experience that people have, is trying to find the people who mean a lot to them and to find their remains in a place where they can honor that.
Even to this day, Jason, even to this day, we're doing it, because that's how I'm talking about war soldiers, folks in the field. And that's how close we came to each other, that if we was in the field for each other, we wanted that person to get out the field before I would get out the field. That's how much love we had for each other. And so now today, we're still looking for our veterans soldiers that we serve with in the city of Philadelphia, and there's no way that we can track anyone down. It's horrible. And I'm asking some national veterans organization to take a look at it. Don't have to take my word. Just go to investigate the city of Philadelphia, find out the state law for Veterans Affairs, and you'll see exactly what it is. If I can try and find the citation for the state law real quick, and not to disrupt your questioning, Jason, so you can continue on. I'm just going to look for the actual state law so that those who listen to me can. Oh, no, do this. Just research the case called Merretazon versus City Council of Philadelphia.
And
All
if
right?
anyone's interested in this, they can email me, and I'll provide this information as
Thank you,
well.
Jason, so much for that.
Ari, you mentioned something that I wanted to follow up on, and you mentioned parades and these commemorations of Vietnam veterans, sometimes 50 years later. As you know, last month was the 50th anniversary of the U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam. And I'm curious because I've read that the city of Philadelphia honored you as part of these commemorations, and I'm just curious about your experiences with these types of anniversaries and public commemorations of Vietnam veterans 50 years later. What are your thoughts on those?
Well, my thoughts is relative to my behavior. I don't lead any of those types of. I don't advocate for any of those types of activities, public activities for veterans. No one should have to advocate for that, And so I don't. But when they are in flow, they're on, like for the Veterans Parade here in Philadelphia, I participated in, our organization participated in, and those types of things. And I participated in all of the Vietnam War commemorations, because that's something that your particular experience that you're commemorating as well as the war, as well as the United States and in the war. But so that's my behavior, Jason. That I support those type of ceremonial things, but I do not initiate any of that because that's not the most important thing for me, right? That's for those elected officials who want to put a feather in their cap and want to show public they're doing something. They know they have some veterans in the city. Well, if you know you have some veterans in the city, set up the Veterans Affairs Office. That's all you have to do.
So what you're saying is that there are more productive ways for you to advocate for veterans, and
Oh yes, and support any type of activities honoring the Vietnam War. I was called to Congress for Sheila Jackson Lee. She pinned on me the 50th anniversary commemoration of the Vietnam War, right? And I felt good about it. Made myself available and everything, So that's not the issue for me. And it shouldn't be an issue that people try to put over me because I'm an advocate. I've been an advocate all my life. And but so advocates do what they try to think is the right thing and what the law says. It's not like they come out their imagination and create stuff. But so I'm a real trained advocate, legal advocate, and so I use those capacities to help veterans.
well, I'm curious because your particular experience coming home from Vietnam in 1968 in April and May, that was, 55 years ago now. Dr. King had just been assassinated. You were dealing with a lot of mental health problems from the war. What did you wish would have been available to you in 1968 that, is available to veterans now? What do you think would have helped?
I think the most important thing that would have been of help to me as a veteran coming home alone would be some outreach to me. That is, say they recognize the fact that I've arrived back and survived the war, and they should look for me, see what I need, what my needs are, and then we move on from there. But that didn't happen. You see, I had to engage the city of Washington, D.C., you see. And after doing so, of course, they recommended me for a job at the post office and also be a police officer. And already you know that story. But nevertheless, my point is that that's what they should. They need a very strong outreach program that acknowledge veterans and their families and dependents. And they need to acknowledge them without having a veteran having an advocate to raise all these issues. It's not the responsibility of the veterans. It's not my responsibility. I'm doing it because that's what I do. I help folk. I'm an advocate, a legal advocate. And so therefore these politicians, they likewise should have at least a basic understanding that we was in a war called Vietnam War, and some of our soldiers are coming home, you see? But we all gave some, but some gave it all. And that's what we want to be able to recognize those people. And that's the job of every city in the United States, to recognize their veterans without the veterans have to go find them and beg for some assistance. It's unbelievable how the United States treats its veterans. And maybe the broad-based United States have some very strong programs and advocate for veterans and love their veterans. But on the city level, county level, there's a whole different dynamic. And a good example is the city of Philadelphia, the biggest city, most populated city in the state of Pennsylvania, without a Veterans Affairs office.
That's crazy.
Unbelievable.
It must have been a really significant feeling to be recognized after 50 years and to have a pin from a congresswoman. I'm curious about these commemorations and how the actual war is represented, because I strongly support the idea that Vietnam veterans are being recognized for their services, even if it took 50 years for that recognition. But how are people talking about the war itself in these types of public commencement acts where, as you said yourself, that sometimes elected officials like to look good by having these types of public events? So what would you want people to take away knowing about the war in those particular types of commemorations? Like, how should the Vietnam War be remembered?
Those who fought the war should be commemorated as well. Not only the country who declared war, but those who fought the war on the front line should be commemorated in a very special sort of way, because they're special individuals, and everybody in the military knows that. And so therefore there's a role of those folks who represent the military still to represent their veterans, make sure those veterans get their just acknowledgement, and the same thing in terms of the city, or the city and state they live in. You got to maybe acknowledge your veterans, and you acknowledge them just because they survived and they fought this war. And you got to acknowledge those who gave their lives. And that's what they're good at doing, that. Honoring the dead veterans, honoring the veterans who gave their lives for this country. They do that in very high ceremonies and whatnot. But you need more than that, because after that high ceremony, the veterans and their families and their children still having major problems. And they still have to initiate everything themselves. There's nobody looking for a veteran right now these days to help. And they know that they're out there, and they know they have readjustment problems. And there's a track record of all this stuff too. So those politicians today have a better situation to understand than those during Vietnam time. We can say they just didn't know, But they began, through the advocacy of veterans, began to come to know and began to accept a lot of the structures that we talked about, and a lot of engagement and outreach that Vietnam veterans did, and helped us with getting various laws on the books, like the medical diagnostic manual, like PTSD and all those, Agent Orange. All that comes through the Vietnam veteran soldiers who came home and fought our war still, just to be recognized here in the United States.
And I really appreciate your efforts in that. I know that they're very significant, and the public needs to understand.
Very significant to me. People don't have to give me any acknowledgement for that. It's my experience. Every veteran who fought that war have their own separate experience. When you put them together collectively, it's a bad situation that we have now in this country. You see? And veterans try to contend with the issues themselves the best way they can, or could. But still, Vietnam veterans still get the worst of the deal of all the work we did in war and after war. And see, it's hard the other veterans try to be competitive and compete with us. They can't compete with us, so don't even go there. Don't even go there in terms of what you're doing in terms of helping veterans. All you have to do is see what the Vietnam veterans did, how they put their lives on the line for each other after they came home from the war. You see, and it was our lives on the line. Families broke up, jobs lost, mental issues develop, all that type of stuff happens. But again, it's all about acknowledgement, appreciation, and respect in that order.
So we've talked a lot about Vietnam veterans in particular being a generation that didn't have too much support as far as VA care and counseling services and all of these things that you mentioned. I want to talk about recent legislation from the Black Veterans Project. As you know, the Black Veterans Project has partnered with Yale, and they've sued the VA for the wrongful discrimination of Black veterans throughout the 20th century. And I just want to hear about your thoughts on that, and particularly the question of, do you think that Black veterans should get reparations for discrimination?
Hey, seemed like a question I would have asked you to ask, but I'm glad you came out on your own independent way to ask that question. Because, yes, let's start with that last question. Yeah, veterans, for sure. Vietnam veterans and all the veterans of all the wars are deserved reparations, you see, and particularly Black veterans. Now, the white veterans got to argue their own point. We have to argue our own point, right? Because the facts and circumstances are different for us as opposed to regular white veterans or other veterans. And we made a clear record that shows the discrimination and racism applied to Black soldiers in service and out of service. I mean, it's hell-bent. When you get back and read the history about Blacks and veterans benefits, you see that they was ignored purposely by the federal government, by the VA, folks who had the mission to make sure their veterans are taken care of. But they didn't. Although we fought that war, and a lot of folks depended on us in those wars, believe me, and they'll tell you that they admit it themselves if they have a drink and be honest. And so I'm saying here today is that veterans of all wars must be recognized. And it should never be a competitive issue between Vietnam veterans, Iraqi veterans, Afghanistan veterans. I mean, we all veterans, pure and simple. We just fought in different places. So we can embrace that. And so that's what we do. We try to organize veterans regardless of their war experience. And I think that, and if I still retain some of your questions, Jason, that it should be a situation where that the government takes its first initiative to outreach to veterans of all wars. You see, that is acknowledgement. That shows appreciation and also shows respect. You see, but you don't get that in that order, you know? You don't get that. It just, when the problems hit the fan in the public domain, that's when they come out and try to give some help to those specific problems that have gained national attention. It should be a matter of course. Veterans come home, they acknowledge, they're recognized in their cities, in their county, in the state, in the way they can do it, you know? We leave all that up to the local folks. But they got to be acknowledged, got to be show that they're appreciated and be respected. And respect means making sure, look here, let me tell you something respect all about. I applied for this job at the City Hall of Director of Veterans Affairs. And I presented my 10-point preference for the job. They're going to tell me they no longer have 10-point preference. I said, come on, man, this is a federal law. What are you talking about? And so it's all those types. They don't even really acknowledge veterans in the hiring process. I mean, I know a lot of people who applied for, say, positions as with the fire department. Some veterans get hired and some don't, and maybe because they're not qualified. But for the most part, those non-veterans always criticize the veterans by getting the special attention of having veterans in preference. Riddle me that. We done fought for them, and they're going to criticize us because we want our rights. It don't make any sense. But that's how convoluted this whole issue around veterans is in the United States, and it manifests itself on the local levels.
So to go back to the question about reparations for Black veterans.
Okay, yeah, please, thank you. Let me do that.
I'm going to do a thought experiment, right? Say a thought experiment. Say I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute, right? But let's pretend, for example, that I see reparations as a problem in the past. That happened long ago has nothing to do with me. Convince me otherwise, right? Like, tell me, what would you want the public who might doubt that? Explain to me why black veterans deserve reparations, Ari.
Well, you can dispel that long ago notion. That's just an excuse, an implausible excuse at that, because it's current day. Veterans are coming out every day, you know, and soldiers are becoming veterans every day. And so there's no excuse for the way that veterans are being treated, especially when it come down to black and white veterans. It's just crazy. Yeah, I know one thing. When I was in the field, and he was in the field with me, there wasn't no discrimination in that field. It was, that type of thing in terms of what we traditionally know as discrimination and racism.
When they needed you,
once
right?
We got out
when
yeah, they need the need, and so the need's still here, but they're still not addressing and acknowledging the contributions of veterans and encouraging people to also acknowledge the general public to acknowledge them. The federal government has a responsibility, a lead position. Then all the state legislators and city government have a secondary and tertiary positions. And then just people, veterans themselves, you'll see that they do a lot of self-help work. And what happened is that the government put the work on them, on the veterans. Veterans only doing self-help work because nobody else is trying to help them. They see they're going to have to help themselves if they want to get some help. And that's what this whole concept of self-help come about. It was the absence of help by the authorities that responsible for giving that help. And so reparations at the top, I'm a reparations first and foremost. And so reparations for black veterans is clear to me, the level of sacrifice that we made. And I would join any organization who's going to put forth black veterans as part of the reparation process. So the Black Veterans Project know that I'm with them 100%. And will be on the front line with them as they continue to move forward this issue around reparations for black veterans. I mean, that shouldn't be no argument.
As a historian, we know, at least those historians paying attention know, that after World War II, black veterans were denied en masse from the GI Bill, right? But the surprising thing that the Black Veterans Project revealed in the last year or so was that since 9/11, black veterans continue to experience discrimination. They're more likely to be denied disability benefits compared to white veterans and as a whole, right? So it's not just the World War II generation. It is continuing, as you said, right?
So nothing has changed. That's the key thing. A continuation means that nothing has changed. Even they found better ways to address the problem. Still, nothing has changed. And black veterans are still, they couldn't come home and even use their benefits for obtaining a home, businesses, and those types of things. They were locked out because they applied the same standard, the racist standard in these cities and states that they did before to veterans, and they ignored the quality level of service, pure and simple. And black veterans should stand up wherever they are in this country and look back and forth, look backwards on terms of what happened to them, and also check themselves out current day and look forward. If those things don't change, what's going to happen to the veterans that soon will be? And so that's the issue. And I just hope that somebody start talking this way in the public domain that has some juice. The elected officials, the governors of states, state representatives, congressional folk. You don't hear that anymore. When I was coming out of Vietnam, that's who helped me get out of the penitentiary and helped me set up the Incarcerated Veterans Affairs Office.
Congressman Dellums,
right? Congressman Dellums, and some of his associates too. They were supporting him, and he's taking the lead on supporting us. And so, also the president at that time, Jimmy Carter. He had a person, Bill Lawson was his Vietnam veterans person, and he definitely lifted us up in a great sort of way. He came down to visit us in the prisons, and even after that, they supported us 100%.
Well, I think that what your interview really reinforces for me is that change as far as veteran services doesn't come out of the generosity of elected officials. It's because veterans like yourself, like Dellums, who's a black veteran from the Korean War, you guys fought, you organized, you pushed for reform, you sued whenever it was necessary, you used the Freedom of Information Act to, get this data, like the Black Veterans Project, and that has a real value. I think there's a lesson to be learned from the efforts that you've done for most of your life, Ari. I have a student who's worked on this the series of interviews, and she's going to law school, and she feels like she's learned a lot about veterans and a lot about activism and legislation. So there's a real value there just from the couple of people who have seen this interview so far. So I appreciate that. I wanna kind of circle back to what we were talking about in one of the earlier interviews, and this was about the process for reaching out to the White House. So I want to go back to 1975. You're incarcerated at Lorton Reformatory, which I learned afterwards was a 99% black population.
Yeah. Did you do the research, man, of the conditions in that prison?
Awful. It sounds awful.
Unbelievable.
So I really, that just sheds more light on how important it was that you organized other incarcerated veterans back in Lorton. And then you didn't stop once you got out. Like, you started expanding and replicating the Incarcerated Veterans Assistance Organization at other prisons. So I really want to go back to that moment in 1965. The Washington Post published an article that highlighted the work that you were doing. And this brings national attention to what you were doing in 1975.
Yeah, Washington Post broke the story.
Tell me about, how did you go to the White House? Who invited you? You were currently incarcerated at the time, correct?
That's correct.
So you were released to go meet with President Carter. Tell me about that. Like, how did that happen?
Well, knowing Bill Lawson, and he understood what veterans was facing, incarcerated veterans, that just piqued his interest. He started initiating a lot of ideas and thoughts of his own, activities and events. And one of them was trying to get the recognition of my work in prison. That's what the basic push was from him, because he saw that what we was doing inside of prisons for veterans had never been done before. And it has such a great impact on families and, and communities and stuff of that nature, and the individual veterans themselves who happen to be in prison now, and they finally got some resources they can do something with once they return. And so I think it was Bill Lawson out of President Carter's office that really understood the moment. And that's what happened. He understood the moment. And I think he may have facilitated that article that came out in the Washington Post. You see, although we was, constantly communicating with news people all over the country, but I think he facilitated that. I'm gonna give him that particular success story, and I really salute him, even to this day. I think he's the one that did it all for me in terms of the White House, and this was not just my attending going to the White House. It was actually getting acknowledged by the president himself, right? Over a handshake, right? In a very public event that they had at the White House for veterans. And so that's how it all started. And that kicked it off. And then from there, we began to develop, or even before then, before the White House thing, we had made contact with Federal City College. We had a campus of Federal City College inside the prison where veterans, but not only veterans, could enroll in the school, in the college. But veterans could receive their benefits just as veterans on the outside could if they was enrolled in a higher education institution. That's mean full benefits while you was in prison. And so people try to make that a complicated issue. What you doing, prisoners getting all this money for and all that old type of stuff. Because they served as a veteran. And what they did subsequently is probably why they're in prison, right? And but you got to acknowledge their service as acknowledge who they are, their commitment they gave. And a lot of folks didn't want to do that. And so we needed that public push, the understanding that incarcerated veterans is the same as other veterans. It's just the facts and circumstances and the situation they find themselves in.
Mm-hmm. So President Carter, after you guys met, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but he did issue a presidential directive to the Department of Justice, and because the president ordered the Department of Justice to start collecting information on incarcerated veterans, they had a series of studies. So there was the first one was published in 1981. It was conducted in 1979. So this is a direct result of Carter ordering the Department of Justice to start collecting information on incarcerated veterans. So we've had 5 or 6 of those since then. They did one in 2016. They published that in 2021. So the only reason why the federal government really knows anything at all about incarcerated veterans, I think, as a historian, I would hypothesize that you brought this attention to the President Carter. Carter issued this order to the Department of Justice to start doing these studies, and there's been 5 or 6 of them since then. So that is a direct, ongoing legacy of the activism that you did in prison.
But no public acknowledgement for it, you see? That's not something that I did it for. But the basic order of society says that when there are significant things done by any individual, not that they have to be veterans, they are acknowledged for it. And veterans, they should be acknowledged for it. And therefore, there should be some acknowledgement for the work I did. But there never has been, except for the articles that came out, laying out the advocacy, all the issues, particular detailed issues that we were talking about. But but that is something that this country has to begin to do. They got to walk towards veterans instead of walking away from them, and not just involve veterans only in the large ceremonial types of things, like the wall down in Washington, D.C. I think I've been there twice since it's been up, and pretty much was encouraged to go overly so by some other veterans, and I did it pretty much for them as opposed to myself. But nevertheless, I still have a very hard feeling against the war and those who promoted, knowing that it was a lie. That starts from the President LBJ, his boy Robert McNamara, who subsequently had a come to Jesus moment and wrote his memoir about it, and told the truth that it was a lie. He knew it wasn't necessary for the Vietnam War to take place, and the Gulf of Tonkin thing was just that. It was just something made up, much like the what's more afterwards called the weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, remember
the
that whole thing they're saying
for the Iraq War. Yes, sir.
It was nothing. Nothing. No such thing. So they follow that same pattern. They probably do it again for the next war as well.
Well, Ari, I'll tell you another thing that I learned through the research process after talking to you. I went back to the Senate testimonies and I read the footnotes. I read all of the appendixes to that. And what I learned was that there had been efforts for VAs to do outreach programs to prisons after World War II. So this happened. It happened before Vietnam. And what happened was whenever Johnson escalated the war in Vietnam, they started moving that funding from VA outreach services to prisons, and they started manning field hospitals. And so all of the resources that they had into this program actually got moved into supporting the war effort. So I was thinking a lot about how the issue of incarcerated veterans really depends a lot on political changes. It depends a lot on war. It depends on who's president. So Carter was supportive of incarcerated veterans. But in that study, another thing that I read was that they had predicted in 1979 that they had funding to make it and to continue outreach to prisons through the VA until 1980. And as you know, what happened in 1980 is Reagan's elected president. He cuts millions and millions of dollars from the VA. And so here we are, there for a moment, incarcerated veterans had national attention to them, and then it faded, and then in 2008, it wasn't until 2008 the incarcerated veterans started getting attention again. So what was raised in 1979 was delayed for 30 years. And that model of bringing the VA as a resource to rehabilitate incarcerated veterans, that was the model in the 1970s. It doesn't come up again until 2008. That's whenever Veterans Treatment Courts start using the VA to do outreach programs against jails. So,
Jason, I knew you could going to make your point, but I need to insert this before I
go
forget.
ahead.
Have you heard of Project 100,000?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, you know they actually drafted 300,000 mentally ill people with mental condition that could not perform the regular military or process to become a soldier.
Yes, sir.
And they went through poor neighborhoods all down the eastern coast, the northeast coast, and I was part of that. I was part of that Project 100,000, which they end up in bringing in 300,000, right? And so, but can you believe it? And so, what I have surmised is that those same folks are the ones that ended up in the prison. The Project 100,000 folks, a lot of them, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them had those same pressures that I had, and probably did some of the same things I did, or committed crimes like I did, right? Because of their readjustment issues, and so it all starts on the front end. In fact, LBJ, if I can recall correctly, counted as part of his he had this national program
The
called
War on Poverty. Yes, sir.
No, it was something else too. War on Poverty. It was something
The Great
else.
Society.
There it is, the Great Society. And he put out there that he was doing this to help poor people. You know, sending poor people to war to help them in society.
When you say it out loud, it sounds really absurd, doesn't it? Yes.
Yeah, we were just cannon fodder, man. And when you, as a soldier, realize that's what was happening, that happened to you that way, shit, I can't forgive that. I mean, I understand it. I know it's past, but it's still, I curse every time I understand that that's what they did, you know, to me and other black men and other poor people to fight the Vietnam so-called war. There was nothing but a political sham.
Just to clarify, yes, sir, twice as likely to die in combat up until 1968, whenever the Army took efforts to lower that number. But yeah, Project 100,000 veterans were twice as likely to die in combat compared to white veterans. You're absolutely right. That's one of the reasons why King spoke out against the war in 1967. And then they did a study in the early 90s, and what they thought they were going to do was prove Johnson and McNamara right. They thought that they would prove that Project 100,000 veterans were more likely to go to college, more likely to get better jobs, and they were wrong. And they seemed very surprised that they were wrong in the testimony, you know, and they were absolutely wrong. And they speculated, too, that one of the reasons why they couldn't find many Project 100,000 veterans for their national study was because they were in prison.
They did so. Yeah. Logical conclusion. And then, see, that's understanding, I hope in a backhand sort of way, the outcomes of war, you know? And we have to do that on the front end. We have to think about the consequences of war on the front end and be prepared for what we understand that will happen, because we done laid it out, we stepped it out, and we see these things will happen, more likely to happen, and we got to be ready for our veterans when they come home with all these illnesses and all these wounds and whatnot, and protecting families of those who have died. But all that has to be done on the front end of war, you see. And right now, I don't think that's going to occur. You know, Jason, it took me about 2.5 to 3 years to stop cursing after I came out of the war. Because it's all frontline soldiers do. We curse every other word, because we cursed the fact that we was there. But now when I hear stuff like you're just sharing with me, the data, I want to start cursing like a soldier again. That's why that make me feel, I cursed all that.
It's understandable, Ari. I wouldn't blame you at all. I want to kind of circle back to that point I was making about Veteran Treatment Court.
Yes, sir.
And the problem that they faced and realized very early as they started to provide treatment to veterans in jail was that they had no idea how many veterans were in jail. They had no idea how many were in prison, even though we had these Department of Justice studies. I want to know your thoughts. Why don't you think that people, cops and the jail and even the public are thinking about veterans in prison or jail? Like, why, whenever someone's arrested, why aren't they asking about military history? Why don't they see people in jail as veterans?
Well, why they're not thinking about veterans as they should is all happens on the front end, and it follows up and increase, and it get even worse after soldiers come home as veterans. And so we came home as individuals. So the country did not make a big deal about us coming home as they did in World War II, the Korean War, those types of things, right? So we just came back in individuals, what have you, that type of thing. And so the general public, all they could deal with all the negative aspects of the war, of going to war, and they in fact targeted a lot of that directed to those soldiers who had nothing to do with the war but to fight it and survive. They targeted on us. And so the reception coming back home, there really wasn't a reception. It's just what they could put up with. You see, as we begin to use our agency as veterans to ask for our rights, to look for the rights that we have as veterans. And so it was a big struggle. And still it will continue to be a struggle if the efforts of those Vietnam veterans, of all the things that we had accomplished and got the government to do, is not continued to follow up on, then it's going to end up being the same way, I think.
Still to this day, we have especially black veterans who are dying in jails. They're dying from police brutality, from abuse within these facilities. Why do you think that black veterans especially aren't treated like veterans whenever they're in jail?
Because they're black. Simple as that, because they're black. And then it's a double notion, It's one, you incarcerate a lot of black men, and the stats shows all that, who's in jail and who's in prison. And then you find out that there's some veterans who in that prison they're trying to get their benefits, which had nothing to do with their crime. But a lot of times the administration will hold that crime against them from having their benefits. And so from the time that I was working with veterans in prison, veterans were able to receive 100% of their benefits. But now I think the last conversation we had, you said they only can receive 10 or 15% of their benefits. And they have to struggle hard for that, because if there's not a favorable administrator or director of the prison, then you're in bad shape, because you have no one to go to, because no one is willing to listen to you. No one wants to acknowledge you as a veteran, even while you're in prison.
Mm-hmm. Last week,
was it helpful?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was asking, did I answer your question? Because was that helpful?
I think it was. I think that you identified that people oftentimes don't see black men as people who need services.
Yeah, well, it's historical. I mean, just the historical relationship in this country. That's just bottom line. That's what it is. And you see it carried over in every social aspect of life. And while they put different faces on it, it still remains the same. Because when you look at the end of the day and the relationships and the resources, we're still last. Last hired and first fired. That's still real to many veterans, and that is even further crime because of how the sacrifices they made to this country and the types of government preferences they was given by the government that they had to actually advocate for themselves. I think it started back in 54, something like that. I can't recall the name. But nevertheless, there was no real support until the federal government began to do its outreach and trying to put a good face, a public face over its relationship with its veterans. And then others started coming on board because they was offering grants to people who help veterans out and those types of things. So that's how that thing began to snowball, And so now, if I was a prison administrator, I would go out, do some outreach, find out who's a veteran in my prison that I direct, and try to provide every benefit they're entitled to, make sure they have it. Simple as that. And there's no other magic about it. I have some veterans. I have 15 veterans in this prison. I'm going to make sure that if they're eligible for any benefits still, then we're going to make sure they acquire those benefits. If not them, their spouses and their dependents.
I want to continue this kind of line of questions about mental health and black men especially. Last week, there was a man on a New York City subway who was strangled to death. He had mental health problems, he was hungry, and he was actually killed on the subway by a white veteran. Do you think that black men are oftentimes not seen as people who need mental health help and services? Are they black men with mental health problems, are they seen as criminal and violent and a threat?
Yeah, well, black men, period, in the core of things, are not seen as human still, and you can put any other face on it. That's why that Marine soldier did what he did. He knew that brother didn't have a weapon or anything like it. It wasn't cause no threat to anybody's life. He just wanted to show off with his thing, and he can kill somebody with that the chokehold. And everybody know that type of chokehold is basically a death-ending situation, you know. And so I don't give him no credit. Don't hold him up at all. He can save nobody. The guy was just begging, as beggars do. And I guess he got. I don't even know anything. No, I don't know any of the facts of the story. Really, I don't. I'm just dealing with the facts that I do know, that there was a beggar on the train. He was choked out by this Marine. For what reason and all that, I don't have yet to know. But what I've heard, that it was no major. He was not a major threat. He was just begging. He might have harassed one or two people, but that's what beggars do. Because people don't want to be bothered with them, so they shoot him off and say, "Get away from my face!" All that. Don't be busting with me and all that. And then somebody hear that, then this guy who had this hero complex come in and decide to kill this man. I hope he get as many life turns he possibly can get.
I was curious about your thoughts on that. I didn't plan to ask about that.
I mean,
well, I want to thank you, Ari, for shedding some light on some very serious social issues in the United States, and I want to start to transition in the interview to start talking about legacies and things like that.
yeah. Let me
Go ahead.
intervene here. I want you to talk about your legacy, because with the work that you're doing and have done, there's no counter. There's no other people's doing that type of work, Jason. And I really appreciate you for that, and I respect you for that.
I appreciate
And
that,
I will
Ari.
always acknowledge you for that, and others should do the same. And I hope that you receive all the acknowledgement and appreciation and respect that you do, because you are showing this country what they have done to their veterans. A lot of their veterans is not getting the benefits that the country has set up for them.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
Like yourself, I don't do it for acknowledgement, but I do acknowledge you in my book, Ari. You know, you said that you've never been.
Send me an autographed copy, by the way.
I will. I do acknowledge how historically important you are. And so thank you for meeting with me and sharing your story and allowing me to, just ask all of these questions. I really appreciate that.
I'm flat-footed, man. You come on, just ask anything. I try to answer them.
Well, there is one topic that we never really talked much about, and I want to talk about how COVID-19 impacted your life. What effect did COVID have on your activism? And just tell me about that experience for you.
Well, my activism adjusted itself as to how society adjusted to COVID. I didn't need, so we didn't plan to downsize our advocacy at all. In fact, I know I didn't, and people associated with me, the Veterans Point Man Soldier Heart Ministry, we didn't do that at all. In fact, we probably stepped it up a little bit more because we knew that people, had some other concerns on their mind that they view as more important to the collective than veterans themselves. So we understood that. But every chance that we had opportunity to engage the city of Philadelphia or to put out some information, then we did. And finally, the things began to, by the time, now help me out with this timeline, because I think I was finished with Point Man Soldier Heart Ministry in 2021. That's when I think 21, 22. That's when I resigned after.
So COVID started March 2020.
Look, Jason. Look, man. I'm telling you, I didn't factor it as a barrier to anything that I did, other than no more things, the laws I had to obey, in terms of wearing masks and stuff like that. I mean, beyond that, I didn't give a consideration that this is going to keep me from. I knew that other folks had adjusted, and therefore I had to adjust to them as well. But I didn't put no damper on my level of understanding the need for advocacy for veterans and for black people in this country for reparations.
Well, both black people and veterans were extremely vulnerable during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely,
Did
man.
anyone in your
It always happened
community
that
was
way.
anyone in your community affected by COVID?
I think a couple of members in our veterans organization, at least one, I think, passed. I can't recall the brother's name. Um, and but not in my family, direct family, no. And I haven't heard anyone talk about the members of our extended family. You know, they might have caught COVID, but no one died from it.
But you were about to say that black people and veterans were always vulnerable. Is that what you were about to say?
Always, hey man, come on. I mean, look, we was enslaved in this country, man. Don't ever forget that. That's the context. That's the context of our relationship to society today. They can always call us slaves, and that need to change. They need to change the language. We're no longer slaves, even in their eyesight. You see, even according to their law, we're no longer slaves. So why you continue to put it in your books and your religious doctrines and all that type of stuff? I mean, that's how big it is for me. Why are you continuing to call black people slaves? In your higher education institutions, in your religious institutions, in your governmental institutions. You need to stop it because there's no rational reason to do so other than your own self-aggrandizement of putting yourself above other people and putting people low and trying to keep them on that totem pole, and you continue to receive your unjust enrichment from all that they've done and all that their fathers done and all that their mothers done. They allow you to even go to school now. So, I mean, you know, but people don't even think in that direction because they're, you know, they're into a point of recognizing what happened and saying that, and they know they'll say, they put it right on their mothers and their father. My mother and father had never done anything. Well, it wasn't about individuals, really. It was really about the institutions called the federal government, called the state government, called the church, called the religious institutions, called the insurance companies, you know, those type of things. That's who we got to fight against. And these white folks who think that that we're coming after them as individuals, no, not at all. So you have to continue to go down that road, you know, because that's a road that doesn't really exist. The existing road that we must approach is those of these institutions I just named. Other than that, and therefore, so therefore, whites who support the notion and understand their history, our history, and what happened to us in this country, they need to step forward because they've been educated to the facts, and they just decide, or the facts are available to them if they wasn't educated to them. You see, and so now they have all the information. And what you gonna do? What's the need for us to continue to protest? But there's a need because the hate still exists for black people in this country, and we should never ever stop demanding and commanding reparations. Commanding reparations, because those things belong to us. Those are our property. Those are our opportunities. That was our human possibilities that never manifested themselves. Now, when I put myself in that dream state and say, what if I was a white person, I did all the things that I did, just all the things I've done already, you know, how would I be acknowledged? First thing, I would be acknowledged, and I would have been probably held very high in public offices and whatnot, and encouraged to run for office and all that type of stuff. You know how they do folks who do significant things for this country. Well, then,
They
you know,
put
but not for
statues
black
up,
folks.
don't they? They put
Excuse me?
statues up, and you're written into
Yeah, they put
textbooks.
And don't even put the right narrative under the statue of what this guy did. You see, and they don't have, for me, you don't have to tear down one statue of these enslavers. You see, all you have to do is tell the truth in the narrative of what they did. That is better for me and my children than just make them all disappear as if nothing ever happened. And you know how this country does. They put a story in place of that, in that big gap. They put their own story in that big gap. I say, tell what those folks did to us, what they did to humans in this country.
That's a pretty good point, Ari.
Yeah, man, that's me. That's the real deal. That's the real deal, man. And I've always understood it. And in fact, you know, There had been a major discussion with a lot of groups about how to deal with the statute question. And I take my position, but they all wanted to take the popular route. The popular route. Just the fact that we took down a statue. And other folks are screaming and hollering about that. Well, they should scream and holler about it because they're statues, all right? So even though it's your statue, we need to tell the damn truth about those statue, what it means, who this guy was, who this woman was, what did they do to black folks? So that's just basic common sense for me. I'm trying to spirit over it. I take my position on the truth as I see it and what I think. And if I see the truth and I know that if we follow through it, things would be better, then I stand right there on top of that.
Right on. Well, Ari, I think it's really important to bring up these conversations because most people, I think...
Jason, tell me.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that, I think that most people separate veteran issues, the military supporting the troops away from all of these social topics that you're talking about. They're not thinking about veterans when they're talking about reparations. They're not thinking about veterans when they're talking about mass incarceration. They're not talking about veterans when they talk about police brutality, discrimination, all of that. So,
I wonder why, Jason. I wonder why.
You tell me why you think why.
Well, I asked the question, man, but nevertheless, I had some brief thoughts about that. And they just don't care. They have this thing about they don't want to acknowledge people and they'll put people above themselves. Because I have a problem with non-veterans now in my daily walk here in Philadelphia. If I start talking about I'm a veteran and that I have these types of benefits, they begin to back us. Oh, they feel like something as if we've done something special. They get some special treatment. That's how short their thinking is. As opposed to say, these are the folks that protected me, while I was going to school, or while I went to Canada. That's a better example. When Project 100,000 was going down, there was another project getting folks out of the country and student deference and stuff like that, deferments. So it's a crazy, but you got to keep your eye on the prize or keep your eye on the subject. The subject is veterans. So all that you do is towards making life better for veterans and their families. Now, why you want to mix in a lot of other stuff, I have no idea because these are the folks that's going to hold down the fort, going to stand by their post and fight for this country and have fought for this country, with distinction, you see. And yet they come home because the color of their skin, they get put in that same old slave bag. Ex-slave. Don't call me no ex-slave, Jason. Don't refer to my folks as no ex-slave. I mean, as slaves. Yeah, we were ex-slaves, but don't refer to us now as slaves because that put us back in that same mentality. We are slaves and we don't want to do anything to deal with that, or we can't deal with that. Oh, yes, you can. You tell these folks to stop calling you and acknowledging your people as slaves. That's fundamental. And you don't have to get out your house to do that. Write a letter, get on the phone call, talk to your organization, tell everybody, when people start talking about veterans, then, that's the position you take.
Well, in the same way that slave is a dehumanizing word to use for a human person, right? I think that the public tends to turn veterans into symbols, and then symbols are easily used to support different agendas, They're not seeing veterans as human beings who have complex lives and problems and social issues that are part of American society as a whole. So I think that's part of it too.
I think Trump said something about veterans. He don't like veterans who do something, some crazy notion he had.
Yeah, I try not to listen too much to what that man says.
Thinking that was a non-popular position to take. So, it was a crazy, dumb position to take. But nevertheless, man, look, you have a country, the people are obligated to men, and now women are obligated to protect the country by going into service and whatnot, or responding to the call for them to come into service. And yet when they give all that, put their life on the line for that and giving that service, especially on the front line in war, and come back home, why should they have to look for and chase down and demand services and assistance and rights that they are due? It's unbelievable. This country is, I talk about this country like a dog. But I'm here in the country. But you got to face up to it until this country deal with the truth that stares them in the face every day on every issue that it come up, every major issue like these killing blacks and by police officers, and blacks killing blacks. All that's deal with the fact that we were enslaved people, and we continue to be looked at enslaved people, and those types of lack of resources continue to be absent from be still in our lives, and resources no longer there for us to draw upon in the same equal way that is for whites and others.
Well, Ari, we talk a lot about history because I'm a historian. What's next for you? What's the future like for you? What would you like to do next?
Well, Jason, after understanding this project that you're doing, I always wanted to expand upon it because you're dealing with incarcerated events from the historical research piece. But we got to put something online that actually deal with the end user of our work. The end user of our work are those veterans in prison and veterans per se, And so we got to be able to do something that actually helps them directly. You see? That is to say, if it's only 10 veterans, incarcerated veterans organizations in the country, then it should be more than that, of course. It should be one in every prison. And the government should understand that they should have that. The state should understand they should have that. So that's be my continued work to try to advocate for that to happen. And I do it as I'm able to do it. But I know that if other folks don't understand it, my doing it alone would not make a big headway. But we have to understand that. We got to acknowledge, treat our veterans as a distinguished group of people because they are distinguished from the general public. That's what the city of Philadelphia tried to pull that trick on me. Talking about you're a veteran, you don't have no other distinguishable rights other than what everybody else have rights. So why should we acknowledge you as a veteran? Cold-blooded, I mean, that's a smack upside the head. You know what I'm talking about? To say something like that, being in the position that you're in as an elected official, it just shows you how lack of concern they are for veterans because they don't understand the context in which veterans have come out of and need assistance for.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I'm always thinking about how we can implement our knowledge.
So let's do it. We'll end up doing something. I'm sure we'll end up doing something. I propose some things that hopefully that you'll be able to respond to, and because you are needed, my friend, you are absolutely needed to open this big box of veteran issues once again, that we still have too many veterans in prison, and we're not doing anything to rehab them or to make them live successful lives in and out of prison.
I'll do what I can. I'm only trying to help shed light.
Well, I got your telephone number. You know that,
I know that. All right. So give me a call anytime. And after this interview, if there's anything you want to go back and talk about afterwards, we can always schedule another follow-up.
Okay, it's good to know because, I'm using this interview to write my memoir, and it's an accommodation I give to myself because of my TBI, you see. And I thank you so much for supporting me in that and making that happen because by this time next year, we should have a published book of my memoir, and it may hopefully sooner than that, but for sure, I can say by this time next year, we should have a publication that talks about war in prison.
Well, I hope it's been helpful for you, Ari. It's been a pleasure of mine to get to know you a little better and to speak with you.
Yeah, salute you, man.
All right. Well, I'm going to end the interview now, but feel free to contact me anytime.
Well, I will. I will. Now, I'm the type of guy to get on the road, drive down to Virginia Tech if need be, just for GP, just to meet you face to face, man.
Let's do it.
Or meet you someplace halfway, or do something that we can be in the same space together. So that's still on my mind, trying to make that happen.
Let's think about it.
And maybe I talk to Richard and Victor, and we pull together something.
Sounds good to me. Well, thank you again, Ari, for sharing your story with me.
Thank you so much.
It's a real honor.
Appreciate you, man.
All right, I appreciate you.
It's a real honor for you to do this work, my friend. I appreciate you as well.